If you're somewhere past 60 and you've spent your whole life being told that the only way to stay strong, keep your muscles from fading, and hold on to your energy is to eat more meat, I'd like to gently show you something that might surprise you, because there were people in the ancient world who lived long, worked hard, and stayed sharp well into old age, and their strength didn't come from the butcher's block at all. It came from a handful of humble plants named right there in the pages of Scripture. Plants so ordinary that most of us walk past them in the grocery store without a second glance. And yet, these are the very foods that fed prophets, kings, shepherds, and farmers for thousands of years. In the next several minutes, I'm going to walk you through 12 of them, 12 plants from the Bible that can quietly do much of the work meat does for your body, giving you protein for your muscles, iron for your energy, and nourishment for your heart and your mind. And I'll show you not only what they are, but the simplest way to bring each one into your own kitchen this week, because I think you'll find that the wisdom we've been chasing in expensive supplements has been sitting in Scripture the whole time, waiting patiently to be remembered. Now, before we begin, I want you to keep two things in the back of your mind. First, pay special attention when we reach number 6, because it's a food mentioned only one single time in the entire Bible, so rare that most people who've read the book their whole lives have never once noticed it. And yet it may be one of the kindest foods there is for aging eyes and an aging heart. And second, when we get down to number 3, I'm going to tell you the true story of a young man who stood before the most powerful king on earth, refused the king's rich meat and wine, asked instead for nothing but plants and water, and what happened to his body, after only 10 days, left the king's own officials speechless. So, hold on to that, because it changes how you'll see everything else. Let's begin, and we'll count our way down, saving the very best for last. We start at number 12 with barley, one of the oldest grains ever cultivated by human hands. And if it feels too plain to matter, remember that barley is the grain of Ruth, the widow who gleaned in the fields of Boaz during the barley harvest, and whose quiet faithfulness placed her in the very lineage of the Messiah, and it's the grain in the 5 small loaves a boy handed to Jesus before 5,000 people were fed. Barley was the bread of ordinary working people, and that's exactly its gift, because barley carries a special kind of soluble fiber called beta-glucan, and many studies suggest this fiber may help support healthy cholesterol levels and steadier blood sugar, which for a body over 60 can mean a heart that works a little easier and energy that doesn't spike and crash through the afternoon. The simplest way to enjoy it is to cook a pot of pearl or hulled barley the way you'd cook rice and spoon it warm into your soups and stews, letting it thicken the broth and fill you in a way that keeps hunger away for hours. Barley is a reminder that God tends to hide His most faithful provisions inside the plainest packages. From there we move to number 11, millet, a tiny golden seed you may never have cooked with, yet it's listed by name in the book of Ezekiel, where God instructs the prophet to bake a bread from 6 ingredients at once, and millet is one of them. What makes millet so gentle for older bodies is that it carries no gluten at all. So for those whose stomachs have grown sensitive with the years, it sits easy and light, and it brings with it a good measure of magnesium, the quiet minerals so many of us run low on, the one your body leans on for calm nerves, restful sleep, and a steady heartbeat. Cook millet like a soft porridge in the morning with a little honey and cinnamon, or let it cool and toss it into a salad, and you have a warm, comforting food that asks nothing of a tired digestive system. Now the next one goes a little deeper, and here at number 10, we come to spelt, an ancient cousin of wheat, that our great-grandparents would have known well before modern farming pushed it aside. Spelt appears in Scripture more than once, standing in the fields of Egypt, and again in that same 6-grain bread of Ezekiel, and its beauty is that it tends to carry a touch more protein than the common wheat on today's shelves, along with a generous amount of manganese and B vitamins that help your body turn the food you eat into real, usable energy, the kind of energy that gets you out to the garden or out for a walk, instead of leaving you sinking into the chair. If you tolerate wheat, look for spelt bread or spelt flour and use it just as you always have, and you'll be eating much closer to the way the people of the Bible actually ate. But here's where it starts to get interesting, because at number 9 we leave the grains for a moment and come to flax. And flax has a quiet story in Scripture, for it was stalks of flax that Rahab piled on her rooftop to hide the 2 spies in the city of Jericho, and flax was grown all through the ancient world to be woven into fine linen. In those days, people prized the plant for its fibers, but today we've rediscovered something remarkable about its little brown seeds. Because flaxseed is one of the richest plant sources there is of an omega-3 fat called ALA, the same family of fats found in fish, the fats that many researchers believe may help support a healthy heart and a clear, sharp mind as we age. And flax carries more of a protective compound called lignans than almost any other food on earth. The one thing to remember is to buy it ground, or to grind it yourself, because the whole seed often passes right through us without giving up its treasure, and then simply stir a spoonful into your oatmeal, your yogurt, or a glass of water each morning. It's a small habit that the people of Scripture would never have imagined, and yet it draws its goodness from a plant they knew by heart. Now we arrive at number 8, and we return to the family of foods that may be the closest thing to meat that ever grew from the ground, the humble bean, and specifically the broad bean, or fava bean, which was so much a part of daily life that when King David fled from his own son and arrived hungry and weary across the Jordan, his friends brought him wheat and barley and beans and lentils to restore him. A single serving of beans gives your body a real, satisfying dose of protein, the very building blocks your muscles need to stay strong, so that you can keep lifting, keep walking, keep carrying your own groceries, and living your own life. And beans bring folate too, which your body uses to make healthy blood, and which many believe helps guard the mind. Soak them, simmer them soft, and fold them into a thick soup, or mash them with a little olive oil and garlic, and you have a meal that would have sat comfortably on any table in the ancient Near East. And this brings us to number 7, and I want to slow down here, because this one carries a story that has moved hearts for 2,000 years. Do you remember the parable of the prodigal son, the young man who took his inheritance, wandered far from home, and lost everything until he found himself feeding pigs in a foreign field, so hungry that he longed to fill his stomach with the pods the pigs were eating? Those pods were carob, the long dark seed pods of the carob tree, sometimes called St. John's bread. And there's a tenderness in this, because the very food that marked the young man's lowest hour is a food of quiet mercy. Carob is naturally sweet without any sugar. It carries no caffeine, and it offers a good amount of calcium and fiber, which is why for generations it's been ground into a gentle substitute for chocolate, one that won't keep you awake at night or unsettle a sensitive stomach. If you love the taste of something rich and sweet in the evening, but your body no longer forgives you for it the way it once did, try a warm cup of carob, and let it remind you that even in the far country, even at our lowest, God has already prepared a way home. Now, before we go further, I want to ask you something directly, friend to friend. When was the last time your evening meal left you feeling nourished and light rather than heavy and tired? Because the ancient way of eating, built on these plants, was designed by the hand of God to feed a body without weighing it down, and that matters more, not less, as the years go by. And speaking of the years, do you remember the number I asked you to watch for, the food mentioned only once in all of Scripture? We've reached it Number 6. The pistachio. And here is that rare treasure, because in the entire Bible, in every chapter and every book, pistachios are named a single time. When the aging patriarch Jacob, sending his sons back down to Egypt during the famine, tells them to fill their bags with the finest gifts the land can offer: a little honey, some spices, and pistachio nuts and almonds, the very best products of the promised land, chosen to soften the heart of a ruler. And what a fitting choice, because the pistachio is one of the only nuts on earth that carries meaningful amounts of two compounds called lutein and zeaxanthin, the same pigments that concentrate in the back of the human eye, which is why so many researchers are drawn to what these little green nuts may offer for aging vision, and pistachios bring potassium for healthy blood pressure, and protein for your strength besides. A small handful a day, shells and all, so you eat them slowly, is one of the easiest and most pleasant habits you could ever begin. And now you know something about this food that almost no one sitting in the pews beside you has ever noticed. From that rare gift, we move to number 5, the walnut, a nut so ancient that it appears in the Song of Solomon. When the beloved goes down to the grove of nut trees to see the valley in bloom, and the tree named there has long been understood to be the walnut. Look closely at a walnut sometime, at the way its two halves fold together in ridges and folds, and you may notice it looks uncannily like a tiny human brain. And there's a poetry in that, because the walnut stands nearly alone among tree nuts for how much of that same heart and mind omega-3 fat it carries, the ALA we spoke of with flax. Many studies gently suggest that a small daily serving of walnuts may support both a healthy heart and healthy aging of the mind. The two things so many of us pray to protect as we grow older: the wish to keep our hearts beating strong and our memories bright enough to know our grandchildren's names and tell them the old stories. Chop a few over your morning cereal, or eat 7 or 8 in the afternoon, and you've done your body a quiet kindness. Now we come to number 4, and we return to the promised land, because when Jacob chose the finest gifts of the land, he named the pistachio, and, right beside it, the almond. And the almond runs all through Scripture, like a golden thread. When God wanted to show the people which man he had chosen to lead them, it was Aaron's staff that budded overnight and blossomed and bore ripe almonds. And when Moses was told to fashion the sacred lampstand for the tabernacle, the golden lamp that lit the house of God, its cups were shaped like almond blossoms. This is a food God himself pointed to again and again, and the almond earns its honor because it carries vitamin E, an antioxidant that helps protect your cells from the ordinary wear of the years, along with magnesium for your nerves and sleep, calcium for your bones, and a satisfying dose of protein and good fat that keeps hunger quiet. A small handful of almonds, or a spoonful of almond butter spread on a slice of that spelt bread, turns a snack into real nourishment, and every time you eat one, you're tasting a food that lit the very house of God. And now we're close, so close, and here at number 3 is the story I promised you at the very beginning. So listen closely, because it's true, and it's written down for us to read. When Babylon conquered Jerusalem, the young man Daniel and 3 of his friends were carried off to serve in the palace of the most powerful king in the world. And the king ordered that these young men be fed from his own royal table, the richest meat and the finest wine, to make them strong for his service. But Daniel quietly asked for something else. He asked the steward for permission to eat only vegetables, only the plants of the field, and to drink only water. And the steward was terrified, because if these young men grew thin and weak, the king would have his head. So Daniel proposed a test, just 10 days. 10 days of nothing but plants and water, and then let the steward judge for himself. And at the end of those 10 days, Scripture tells us plainly, Daniel and his friends looked healthier and better nourished than every single young man who had been eating the king's meat, so much so that the steward took away the royal food from all of them and gave them plants instead. Now, we can't reduce that whole account to a single vegetable, but at the heart of the plants those young men would have eaten stood the chickpea, one of the great protein foods of the ancient world, the little golden legume that gives your body protein and fiber and iron and folate all at once, feeding your muscles, steadying your blood sugar, and keeping you full and satisfied without a scrap of meat. Roast them crisp for a snack, simmer them into a stew, or mash them into hummus with olive oil and lemon, and you're eating almost exactly what carried Daniel's strength before a king. Let that settle in, because it isn't a modern theory, it's a story 3,000 years old. Now, before we reach the final two, I want to tell you one more story, because there's a tired soul in Scripture I think many of us over 60 will recognize. The prophet Elijah, after the greatest victory of his life, suddenly collapsed under the weight of exhaustion and fear, and he walked out into the wilderness, sat down under a lonely broom tree, and prayed that he might simply die, because he was worn out to the very bottom of his being, the way we sometimes are when the years and the losses pile up. And what did God send to that broken, exhausted man? Not a lecture, not a vision, but food. An angel touched him, and there beside his head was a simple cake of bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water, and the angel said only, "Get up and eat." So he ate, and he lay down again, and the angel came a second time and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is too great for you." And on the strength of that plain bread, that humble grain from the earth, Elijah rose and walked 40 days and 40 nights, all the way to the mountain of God. Sometimes the most spiritual thing a weary person can do is eat something real and rest. And God knew that, and he fed his prophet with bread. Which brings us, fittingly, to number 2, wheat itself. The grain woven through more of Scripture than almost any other. The grain of the bread that Jesus took and broke and called his own body, the bread of life. Whole wheat, and especially sprouted wheat, carries protein and fiber, and a whole family of B vitamins that turn your food into energy. And here is the beautiful secret the ancient people knew without knowing the science of it. Because when you eat a grain like wheat together with a legume like beans or lentils, the two of them combine to give your body every building block of a complete protein, the very thing meat provides, drawn entirely from the ground. That's why that 6-grain bean and lentil bread in Ezekiel was such perfect nourishment, and it's why a simple meal of bread and beans has kept whole peoples strong for millennia. Choose whole grain or sprouted breads over the pale, empty kind, and pair your grains with your beans the way your ancestors did without ever being taught. And now, at last, we come to number 1, the food I've saved for the end, and it may be the humblest of them all, the lentil. Do you know the story? Esau, the strong elder brother, the hunter, came in from the field one day famished, and there was his brother Jacob cooking a pot of red lentil stew. And Esau was so overcome with hunger for that simple bowl that he traded away his birthright, his entire inheritance as the firstborn, for a single meal of lentils. Think of that the humble lentil was so satisfying, so deeply nourishing, that a strong man counted it worth more in that moment than his own future. And the lentil earns it, because for a body over 60, there may be no finer plant food on earth, giving you a generous amount of protein for your muscles, a rich supply of iron to carry oxygen and fight the tiredness that iron loss so often brings in later years, plus folate for your blood and mind, and a soft, gentle fiber that's kind to your heart and easy to digest. Lentils need no soaking and cook in minutes, so a warm pot of lentil soup with a little onion, garlic, and cumin is perhaps the single easiest, most affordable, the most complete plant meal you could ever set on your table. A bowl of stew worth more than a man once realized. So there they are, 12 plants from the pages of Scripture: barley and millet and spelt, flax and beans and carob, the rare pistachio, the walnut and the almond, the chickpeas that stood before a king, the wheat that became the bread of life, and the little red lentil worth a birthright. 12 gifts that grew from the same good earth God called very good in the beginning, able to give your body so much of what you've been taught only meat could offer: the protein for your strength, the iron for your energy, the quiet minerals for your heart and your sleep and your mind. None of these plants is a cure for anything, and none of them replaces the wisdom of the doctor who knows your own body best. So always let these gifts work alongside the care you already trust. But there's something deeply reassuring in knowing that the path to eating well in our later years was never hidden in some new invention or expensive bottle. It was written down long ago, tended in ancient fields, carried in the aprons of widows and the bags of patriarchs, and blessed at the tables of prophets and kings. And it's still here, waiting for us, as faithful as ever. If this reminded you that the old wisdom still holds, and if you'd like more journeys like this one through the foods and the faith of Scripture, take a moment to give this video a like so others your age can find it too, and subscribe so we can keep exploring together. And now, I'd love to hear from you. So tell me down in the comments, of these 12 biblical plants, which one is already sitting somewhere in your kitchen right now, today, waiting to be used?